With fierce battles continuing in southern Gaza, the Israeli military said today that Hamas militants have fired rockets from humanitarian zones established for non-combatants. This follows the Hamas pattern of operating under hospitals and throughout crowded neighborhoods, using their own civilians as human shields. Elsewhere in Gaza, Israeli troops surrounded the home of the leader of Hamas in Gaza, the mastermind of the October 7th attacks, who is believed to be hiding underground. Could this represent a turning point in the war? Joining me now from Israel to discuss the latest on the ground is freelance war correspondent Chuck Holton. Chuck, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Good to see you, Tony.
So, Chuck, tell us the latest now that the fighting has moved to include southern Gaza.
I did an interesting interview today with a Special Forces soldier that just came out of Gaza and was about to go right back in on another mission. So over on my Hot Zone channel, he spoke very clearly about the fact that they are taking captives, taking prisoner many Hamas fighters who are giving themselves up, and that partially is due to the fact that they're starting to flood the tunnels that these guys were hiding in. And so they're coming up out of the tunnels. And of course, the seawater serves two purposes: to flush the rats out and to destroy much of their equipment, explosives, rockets, and things like that. So it's turning out to be a fairly effective strategy, at least in the north, where they've started to try it. In the south, they are pushing in, and now the defense minister said today that there is nowhere in Gaza that they cannot go. And that is proven by the fact that they have surrounded the home of Yahya Sinjar inside of the southern part of Gaza. Now, they know that he isn't there, but they also know that it's likely that any hostages that are left are going to be somewhere near where he is, and or at least where he was. And so they're going to places like that. They're hoping to be able to free more of those hostages. They've found out some absolutely terrible things from the hostages that were released during the ceasefire last week, and that is that the vast majority of those women were raped, and some of them many, many times, even while the bombs were falling around them. They say that these Hamas terrorists were raping the women and even some of the men. So they are hoping to be able to get some more of their hostages freed. Obviously, many of them are soldiers at this point, and the IDF never leaves any man behind.
So Chuck, earlier this week, Israeli officials announced that 5 senior Hamas military leaders had been killed, including the chief of Hamas's aerial division and 2 battalions. Put this in context in terms of the overall progress that's being made. Are we reaching a tipping point if we cut off the head, so to speak, of Hamas by taking out the leadership?
That's certainly part of the objective. When they say they're going to take out Hamas, what they really mean is not that they're going to remove the idea of jihad, and that would be a much bigger campaign. But what they are planning to do is just destroy any infrastructure that could be used for military purposes, and to kill the leadership of Hamas and replace them with something that's a little bit friendlier. Now, in order to destroy that infrastructure, one of the problems they're having is they're finding that the whole of Gaza is not as a bunch of civilians in cities with some military things sprinkled around there. It's actually a giant military base with 2.5 million civilians living in it. And that's a serious problem for the IDF, because virtually anything in that in the whole of Gaza has been militarized in some way, shape, or form. So whether it's a school, a playground, a mosque, a theater, a government building, even residential homes, they have all been militarized and are essentially at Hamas's disposal to be used for military purposes. And so they're realizing that in order to destroy Hamas's capability to make war, they're going to have to go a lot further than just destroying a few military places. They may have to just raise the whole thing and start over. And obviously that would take a much, much longer campaign to accomplish. So killing the leadership of Hamas as quickly as possible is their quickest route to some sort of victory that they can claim. And the pressure that they're putting on the civilian population is actually serving that purpose. It's actually helping the IDF, because now the civilian population is starting to understand that if Hamas would just give themselves up and lay down their weapons, all of their suffering could end. And they're starting to blame Hamas for, rightly so, than to blame the Israelis.
Right, which is obviously a key strategy here. But you have the international community. I mean, the United Nations repeatedly say, we need a humanitarian ceasefire, which is essentially another name for allowing Hamas to regroup. Is there the sense that the clock is ticking there in Israel, that they're having to move quickly to get to a point before the international community is in lockstep against them? Or are they just ignoring that and they're going to finish this regardless?
Without a doubt, it is definitely they feel that clock, that they're racing against that clock, because that pressure is mounting from all around the world. But also, the Biden administration is really starting to show its true face in this conflict. At the beginning, they were standing up and saying, we stand with Israel. They have the right to defend themselves. And now they're saying, Israel, you cannot take longer than the first week of January to complete this. We will not allow you to replace the government in Gaza with anything other than Palestinian people, et cetera, et cetera. And the problem with that is that the Israelis are saying, the Israeli leadership is saying, well, there's one other group of people that has more power over us than you do, the United States. That's our own electorate.
Right.
And the voters here in Israel are saying, absolutely not. We are not going to put up with more Palestinian authority in Gaza or anywhere else. And as a matter of fact, today, the defense minister was talking very strongly about the fact that the Israelis are thinking very hard about pushing into the north, into Lebanon, and pushing Hezbollah back beyond that river that bisects Lebanon about 15 kilometers from the border. And this is the river beyond which that Hezbollah agreed not to progress south of the last time that they had a war, and Hezbollah has not abided by that in any way, shape, or form. There's also a UN peacekeeping force in that region up in the north that has been about the most worthless of all the worthless United Nations organizations. And so the IDF is saying, we very well may need to open a second front and go up there and do that as well.
You know, Chuck, I would think as the reports from the hostages, as they come back and discuss their treatment, and the more and more information comes out about what happened on October the 7th, the atrocities, the brutality, I just say demonic activity. It was just I was up on the Hill this week multiple times talking with members, and just many of them brought to tears by the reports that they got from the information. I mean, I would think if I were in Israel, there's only one thing to do, that is to eliminate this threat.
That's right. And anybody who has seen that 43-minute video that's uncut, that was filmed by Hamas and surveillance cameras on October 7th, would be hard-pressed. You'd have to be unbelievably intellectually dishonest to see that video and see what they actually did, the actual video, uncut, of all the atrocities that they committed, and then some, and then turn around and say that there needs to be a ceasefire. I mean, that if there was ever a righteous justification for violence, this is it.
Yeah.
And Israel knows that. The Israeli people are not going to let up the pressure on their own politicians until they accomplish this mission, and specifically those 200-something thousand people who have been evacuated from their homes in the north and the south, who cannot and will not go home unless they can go home and live there safely.
Right.
Right.
And nor should anyone have to do that. We wouldn't tolerate it here in the United States. They shouldn't have to tolerate it there.
Right. You know, I was just thinking about that. It's December 7th, 1941. Right. Can you imagine if people around the world were calling for a humanitarian humanitarian ceasefire after what happened at Pearl Harbor.
We got to leave it there. Thanks for joining us, Chuck.